Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to bring you this special bulletin. Modern day journalists continue to prove why no one really wants to go to their websites anymore. In this latest edition of I Don't Like My Job, I Don't Like Games or Gamers, we have this wonderful little article from IGN. Occasionally, lately, I've been feeling like we're going back in time because these articles pop up over and over again, especially with the so-called Gamergate 2.0 coming about. It's like, are we 5, 10, 15 years ago? Because now we're back on Resident Evil 5. This article, Resident Evil game that can't be remade. I think a lot of fans would want to disagree with you. They would love for this to be remade. It's time to rewrite. I wonder what they want to rewrite. What are your guesses, ladies and gentlemen? When Resident Evil 4 was released last year, Capcom's project to remake the glory years of the survival horror series is complete. Not really. They still got, what? Pretty sure they got at least one more. Resident Evil 5. But as the game's post-credit scene suggests, the remakes aren't over because they like making money. Give the fans what they want. Also, and so the big question is, where next? Duh. What do you think? The obvious answer is to remake of Resident Evil 5. But on the game's 15th anniversary, that would be a perfect time to do a remake on this one. 15th anniversary edition, remaster, remake, beautiful graphics, tweak a few things, of course, but keep the story and the gameplay, well, the game, relatively the same. Keep it intact. It's clear that moving forward chronologically will take Capcom's remake into the series' weakest era. Now, this lovely little statement has me a little confused because I did some digging. But let's finish this little paragraph. An era of gameplay and narrative decisions best left in the past. What on earth could they be talking about? Now, I will be honest with you, around Resident Evil 4, I played Resident Evil 4. I lost a little bit of interest. When I tried to play, I believe I played the demo for Resident Evil 5. And yes, it went down a more action-oriented path that I personally did not care for. However, come to find out, I was in the vast minority on this one because Resident Evil 5 sold 14 million copies. That's nothing to sneeze at. I'm pretty sure Capcom would love to repeat that success. And IGN, I find it interesting because you gave Resident Evil 5 a 9.3, and yet here we are complaining because the wind has changed and you're trying to white knight, so to speak, for people who don't even care about what anything you have to say. Resident Evil 5 simply can't be remade, at least not to the standards of Capcom's best work. 14 million copies. I'm going to be repeating that a few times because it absolutely contradicts. The sales numbers contradict just about everything in this article. Almost every complaint. Now, a good bit of the article talks about some things you can tweak. Let's see. Survival horror series. Yes, Resident Evil is a survival horror series. They decided to change paths, go down a different route. Apparently evident cover shooter mechanics, vehicle chases with on-rails, turret sequences, and the constant rattle of assault rifles that 14 million people enjoyed. Even its visual design evokes the sandy shades of modern military games that experienced mass popularity in the 2000s. It all speaks to a series that had lost its way. Oh, heaven forbid. 14 million copies. Rather than reflect on the tenets that were the foundation of its existence, Resident Evil 5 looked to the contemporary gaming zeitgeist, which is what gaming companies do. They do kind of sniff the wind, see which way it's blowing, and try to capitalize on the trends. Some are successful, some fail miserably. 14 million copies, by the way. I think they capitalized on it enough. They took a gameplay mechanic that people were having a lot of fun with at the time and added the Resident Evil horror, zombie-esque outbreak, plague, or whatever, and sold 14 million copies. I'm not saying that to pad the time. I'm saying that because it is an absolute counter to the complaints. Oh no, it lost its way. Obviously not. The result was an unholy hybrid of Resident Evil, Gears of War, and Call of Duty. It's as ugly and unwieldy as it sounds. 14 million. Anyway, let's keep going. This article. Design appears to not be a misguided... Wait, this design appears to be not just a misguided attempt to follow Western successes, again, 14 million, but also misreading of its predecessor. Would you consider this gaslighting? Trying to change history, trying to change the past, calling it misguided, failed attempt? It's like, what? Perspective allowed for a more kinetic, action-heavy game that 14 million people enjoyed. Despite this, Mikami never lost sight of the terror at the core of Resident Evil, through use of enemies that were strategically placed to provide undulating waves of tension. Oh, they're talking about Resident Evil 4? Okay, moving on. We're trying to talk about Resident Evil 5. Meanwhile, presents its enemies as waves to be gunned down with increasingly powerful weaponry, which... at the core, our lovely little lizard brains just kind of like have fun doing that. So what's the problem? Their purpose is cannon fodder. Yes. I believe the backstory of the game is that the new experimental virus was dropped in the jungles of Africa, unprejudicedly hitting everything in its path and turning them into mindless waves. Well, no, I don't think they were mindless. They were able to use guns, so no, they weren't mindless. But they were still zombie-esque. Again, I do apologize. I did not play the game, but I am familiar with enough of it. Those levels are not locations to be explored. Okay, instead they are largely funnels that push you from entrance to exit. Yes. Oh, you mean like survival? Trying to survive with what resources you have available. Okay. Resident Evil 4 may have replaced the series' traditional continuous structure with discrete levels in an attempt to move away from the backtracking-heavy design of previous games. Oh, so they had already strayed away from the blueprint of 1 and 2 and 3, but all of a sudden, Resident Evil 5 was just a massive problem. Sure, okay. 14 million people disagree with you. We're talking about the Village, Raccoon City Police Station. Now, what on earth? Now, there's a reason. Of course, there's an obvious reason. Not because of this nonsense here, but let's get to it. We're almost there. All this to say that a faithful remake of Resident Evil 5 would break Capcom's 7-year streak of brilliant survival horror games. 14 million sold. It's telling that the series' reset point, Resident Evil 7, which some people complain about, I absolutely loved. 7 and 8, absolutely adored. I like that they went back to their roots with, a little bit of action here and there, but mostly the survival, the horror, figuring out with limited resources. I thoroughly enjoyed them. Lots of people, to each their own. I didn't care for where 6 was going, but again, minority here. Reinvention of the very first game, The Haunted House, yada, yada, yada. Let's see. Resident Evil Vigilance, titular location, effective manner. Resident Evil 5's stage-driven structure is simply inferior to this design. It's just different. They went for a change of pace and were successful with it. Modern recreation of it would only further highlight its flaws. How flawed is a game that sells 14 million copies and gets a 9.3 on your own website? But here we go. Here's the fun. Remakes can, of course, completely redefine the structure of their source material. Final Fantasy VII. Don't bring up Final Fantasy VII, the remaster and the rebirth. So many people. Recognizable, an updated version of the classic. It's changed. It is a completely different game. And a lot of people were left sour, which is why Rebirth has far fewer sales than they'd hoped. A lot less than the remaster. Oh boy, remaster? The first one. The part 1 of Resident Evil 7. But its world design and gameplay mechanics are a world apart. Yeah, no kidding, because we have far better graphics. Both of them beautiful games for their time. And so you could argue that Resident Evil 5 is actually the Resident Evil most in need of a remake. You don't want a remake. You want a rewrite. You want to change everything around. But why is that? Well, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. You've already seen it. All this doesn't account for Resident Evil 5's most notorious problem: racism. Are we still here? Do you understand the setting of the game? There wasn't a problem, didn't Resident Evil 4 take place in a South American, where was it? The individuals that you were slaughtering, that you were gunning down in the previous games, didn't have a problem with them because they were zombies. And in this situation, they're still mindless zombies-esque that are attacking you. But it's a problem because why exactly? Oh. Resident Evil 5's depiction of Africa is the Dark Continent is harmful. How? Really? It's harmful. First of all, it's a video game. Second of all, it's a video game about creatures, people who are infected with a virus, who lose control of their own senses, who lose control of themselves, and want to kill you. That is the game. Now, the purpose of this player is to not be killed, regardless of the antagonists. I've never understood this whole idea, but here we go. Set in a fictional Western country, fictional West African country, Resident Evil 5's primary antagonists are black people. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the southern continent, the West African country, who lives there? Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the white people are kind of relegated to South Africa. Is that racist for me to say that? It's not. It's just a statement. But to say that there's a bunch of black people that you kill in Resident Evil because the virus is let loose in Africa, so you kill a lot of black people, to call that racist is disingenuous at best. I'll never understand this. But here we are, yet again, with another article from one of the most trustworthy websites, of course, in gaming journalist. No disingenuous statements here whatsoever. Technically, it's the Ouroboros virus that protagonist Chris Redfield is fighting. Yeah, but the parasite's host is depicted as a nation of mobs and primitives who are violent even before the infection. I'm pretty sure the virus is let loose before you get there. So, y'all correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. In the chat? We're going to keep going. Intentionally or not, what? Really? Resident Evil 5 positions Africa as the Dark Continent. Does it say Dark Continent in the game? An uncivilized world harboring a diseased population that needs gunning down via Western intervention in the name of global security. That's because the disease that they're infected with is the Ouroboros virus that was unleashed by Umbrella Corporation, correct? I mean, Umbrella's throughout every single Resident Evil game. So, yeah. But uncivilized world harboring, again, everything I've heard. Who else lives in the deepest, darkest parts of Africa where the virus was unleashed? It was unleashed there for a reason. Less civilization. Would it have been better? I've heard this question asked. Would it have been better if they would have released the virus in the more, I guess, civilized, for lack of a better term, the more updated, the more built up cities in Africa? Would that have been better? You're still going to be gunning down the same tan of people. But I'm sure they would have found some other problem with that. Again, it's racist because you're shooting black people in Africa where the virus was released. And again, it's a video game. You didn't complain about all the other ethnicities that were gunned down because they were infected with the virus and they all wanted to kill you. But now, all of a sudden, because you just can't have that demographic in a video game as the bad guy, gunning them down. None of this makes sense to me. And I'm sure you lovely, intelligent viewer, listener, however you choose to watch me, thank you. Nonetheless, I'm sure this doesn't make sense to you. So we sit here and we point and we laugh and we watch as one journalist, video game journalist website crashes and burns after another after another. To think that at one time, people went to these websites to find trusted information, trusted opinions on video games. Instead, nowadays, we get nothing more than politicized drivel because that's all they know how to do. Let's keep going. Insensitive treatment of people, but you didn't. Oh, insensitive treatment of people of color was hotly debated even as early as Resident Evil 5's debut trailer because no one has the sense of a boulder to realize that, hey, we're changing settings. One happened in North America. One happened in South America? Did Resident Evil 4 happen in South America? Y'all help me out. Hold on. Isn't Resident Evil Village take place in like almost a Transylvania or European country? I played it and I beat it and I can't even remember. You don't have a problem with that. Oh, wait. I guess it's because they're white. Who's the racist here? Okay. With writers, I'm not going to butcher your names. I do apologize. All the way back in 2009. So that's what year this is. 2009. When you don't understand, the setting of a game is going to dictate the melanin content of the antagonist and the protagonist in this game. Now, in this case, the protagonist, Redfield, is white. Why? Because he's the main protagonist in like all the games, most of the games. Because they're traveling there from another area. Why are the antagonists this particular color? It's the setting. It's what they do. It's what writers do. You want to change the setting. You want to change things up. So would it really make sense if you're in the middle of Africa? Would it genuinely make sense if it was nothing but Korean zombies that were infected? Nothing but Koreans, no black people. All Korean. All Vietnamese. Let's go with that. Would that make you feel happy? The game wouldn't sell for shit because it wouldn't make any sense. It's a setting. Figure it out. This diversity inclusion. Oh, diversity inclusion is important unless they're the bad guys. Unless they're the ones that get infected by the virus. Right? Is that how all this works? And again, who's the racist here? We've traveled back to 2009 where nonsensical arguments are being brought up over and over again. Just like this. Non-controversy with Resident Evil 5. The uproar of gamers getting sick and tired. Mostly of game journalists like this. Sick and tired of nonsense being put in their game at the detriment to the story, detriment to the writing of the characters. So, we'll see where this goes. Personally, if they remade Resident Evil 5, I would probably buy it this time around. I've heard good things about it. I've heard it's fun. But let me know what you think in the comments. And of course, as always, let's point and laugh at the game journalists who don't know even how to play games. Get out of the tutorial. Have a good one.